The morning at Mengo Hospital felt cold and tense, the kind of chill that seeps through to the bones. Clara sat in one ward, legs crossed, eyes darting around. She tried to focus on her phone, to keep herself busy. Her mind, usually sharp and alert, now stumbled over thoughts she didn't want to entertain. The polished businesswoman, used to facing the world with a fierce gaze, suddenly felt small and scared. In the next ward, Alice waited. Her eyes, however, held a glint of stubborn hope. She had tried everything: medicine, herbs, even whispered prayers, and still, here she was, again in a hospital. She had spent so many days, so many years, in places like this, and yet, a small part of her heart refused to give up. Dr. Grace moved between the rooms, papers in hand, unaware of the weight her words would carry. She stopped first at Clara's door, her face serious as she prepared to share the news. She looked up and saw Clara watching her, every ounce of confidence wiped away. Dr. Grace took a deep breath and spoke. "Clara," she said, voice steady but with a tremble just underneath. "Your test results, they show something serious. You're facing a rare disease, one that will leave you with only a few months." Clara's eyes widened, and for a moment, she didn't breathe. Only 3 months? She felt her world twist and shatter, a wave of disbelief crashing over her. Her mind raced to her daughter's smiling face, her husband's steady hand, the company she had built piece by piece. And now, she would have to say goodbye to all of it? Tears began to spill down her cheeks, quiet but unstoppable. She clutched her stomach, feeling hollow, fragile. Every piece of her life, her plans, her dreams, felt like they were slipping through her fingers, and she couldn't hold on. Meanwhile, Dr. Grace entered Alice's room, her eyes softer this time, her lips curving into a gentle smile. "Mrs. Alice," she said, almost whispering, "you're healthy. You don't have any serious illness." Alice froze, her body tense with disbelief. Could this be real? She looked at Dr. Grace, her eyes filling with tears. Relief washed over her, so strong she felt light, almost floating. After years of suffering and hoping, she was free. She laughed, a small, surprised sound, and clapped her hands together, her heart dancing in her chest. Her mind soared, thoughts flooding her with images of the life she could now live, the things she had been too weak to do. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. But as fate would have it, joy and sorrow were tied by a single mistake, the simple swapping of 2 names on 2 sheets of paper. And in that moment, 2 lives stood on the edge of a truth yet to be revealed. Clara sat in her dimly lit room, her heart heavy with sorrow. Each tick of the clock felt like a countdown, a reminder that time was slipping through her fingers. She barely noticed her business anymore. She was wrapped in a shroud of hopelessness, counting her days, feeling aches she'd never felt before. Her body, once lively, now seemed like a ghost, tired and brittle. She shuffled through papers, one after another, putting her affairs in order, preparing for what she thought was her end. But across town, Alice radiated a new energy. Each morning, she rose with the sun, taking in deep breaths, feeling life in every heartbeat. Her laugh, once rare, now filled the air as she reconnected with friends, shared meals, and took long walks. Her steps felt lighter, her body stronger. Free from the shadow of sickness, she felt alive, stronger, reborn. Meanwhile, Clara's business began to change. Whispers filled the hallways, shadows moved where loyalty once stood. Richard, her most trusted hand, the one she had taken in when he had no one, saw a chance. He met in quiet corners with those who had secretly resented her, speaking words of takeover, of power. The walls of Clara's company creaked, as if sensing the deceit unfolding within them. Meetings were held in her absence, plans drawn in secrecy. One cold morning, Clara's husband, worried and pleading, convinced her to see another doctor. But Clara, weary and resigned, shook her head, refusing. She had seen enough, felt enough. What more was there to know? Yet, something stirred in Clara when the news reached her. Whispers of betrayal, of Richard's scheme. Her hand shook, But her mind was suddenly clear. Memories of Richard flashed in her mind, how she had found him, how she had lifted him from a broken past, given him purpose and respect. She felt a pang deep within her chest, a wound more painful than any illness. Clara knew she couldn't simply wait anymore. The next day, with a new resolve, she put on her work attire. Her steps were shaky, but her eyes blazed with determination. She entered the office, her presence like a thunderclap in the halls. Richard looked up, his face drained of color. He tried to mask his shock, but Clara's gaze was unrelenting. Without a word, she passed him, her silence heavier than any accusation. Behind closed doors, she gathered her thoughts, piecing together a plan to save her life's work. Richard, meanwhile, gathered his allies, his confidence cracked, but his ambition unshaken. They pushed forward, trying to declare her unfit, her weakness their reason. Clara stood firm, her spirit ignited. She remembered everything she had done, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, and how much it had all meant to her. And as the board deliberated, she faced Richard, her eyes cold and determined, a silent promise that she would fight, not just for herself, but for everything she had built. Alice lived every day as if she had been blessed with a second chance, basking in the joy of her upcoming wedding. She walked lightly, her steps filled with hope, as she glanced over her shoulder at her fiancé, a man she cherished deeply, someone who had been more than just a friend. Her heart swelled with excitement. She was finally ready to settle down, leaving her illness behind. The date was set, the dress ready, and her heart sang with happiness. But there was a shadow in her life, one she couldn't shake. Her sister, Emma. Emma had been her rock, her caretaker, standing by her during the hardest years, sacrificing her own dreams. But as Alice planned her new life, Emma seemed distant, guarded, as if something was tearing at her heart. The two sisters drifted apart, their bond fraying under the weight of unspoken hurts and past sacrifices. It started small. Emma, arms crossed, looked away, her jaw clenched as she asked if she could invite a few friends to the wedding. Friends who had prayed for Alice, supported their family. Alice, her hands busy folding a delicate lace fabric, didn't meet her sister's eyes. "Emma, we don't have room for anyone else," she said, her voice laced with irritation. "This wedding is planned to the last detail." Emma's face hardened. "It's not just anyone, Alice. They were there when you were sick. Or have you forgotten?" Alice's sigh was weary, her gaze slipping to the floor. "I appreciate what they did, really. But this is my day, Emma. It's about what works for us now." The hurt flashed across Emma's eyes. She took a step closer, her voice trembling. "What works for you, you mean? So it's all about you now, isn't it? You're getting married, you're healthy, you have everything. But I put everything on hold, and now it's like none of that mattered. You're acting like those years never happened." Alice looked up, startled, her mouth opening to speak, to soothe. But Emma was already ahead of her, her voice raw with pain. "Grateful?" Emma laughed, bitter and hurt. "I gave up everything for you, Alice. My job, my relationship, my life. And now you're moving on like I was just a nurse, a helper. But I'm your sister." The words hit Alice, her heart twisting, but she couldn't help the defensiveness that rose within her. "Emma, I never asked you to give up your life for me. You made that choice. And now you're making me feel guilty because I'm happy? If this is how it's going to be, maybe you shouldn't have helped me at all." Emma's face flushed with rage, her fists clenching at her sides. Her voice shook with a venom Alice had never heard. "I wish you would die, Alice." The room fell silent. Alice's eyes widened, her heart pounding as the weight of Emma's words pressed on her chest. She couldn't believe it. Her sister, her rock, wishing her dead. Something inside her snapped, and her hand moved before she could stop it, striking Emma across the face. Emma, eyes blazing, struck back, their once loving hands now lashing out in anger, pain, and years of unspoken resentment. The fight dissolved into a whirl of fists and fury, until a sharp, searing pain burst in Alice's stomach. She gasped, her knees buckling as a scream tore from her throat. Emma, panting, froze, her anger replaced by fear. In that instant, everything else fell away. She rushed to Alice's side, cradling her sister and pleading with her to hold on. At the hospital, Alice lay on a stretcher, the pain racking her body as she clung to the sheets. Emma, guilt etched on her face, held her sister's hand tightly, praying silently. When Dr. David entered, his face was grim as he studied Alice's scans. He hesitated, then met her gaze. "Miss Alice, I'm afraid your condition is much worse than you might have thought." Alice's heart dropped, her voice barely a whisper. "But I was told I was fine. Dr. Grace said I was healed." Dr. David looked confused, flipping through her records. "Are you certain? These scans show a rapid decline." "I'm sorry, but you may only have 2 weeks left." Alice's world shattered, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she clutched the hospital sheets, her body curling in pain and disbelief. This can't be true," she cried. "I was told I was fine." Her voice cracked, filling the room with a sorrow that seemed to darken the very air around her. Dr. David watched her, his face marked with concern, and the thought gnawed at him as he looked back at the records. He needed answers. Determined to uncover the truth, he reached out to Dr. Grace, the doctor who had given Alice her clean bill of health, hoping to understand how such a grave error could have been made. In a dimly lit office, Mrs. Clara sat alone, her fingers tracing the edges of documents she could barely bring herself to look at. Her world had shrunk to those silent papers, plans she'd never see through, until that phone call. "Mrs. Clara," a voice crackled on the line. Dr. Grace's voice was soft, hesitant. Each word felt like a stone dropping into Clara's heart. He confessed, stumbling, "You are not dying. We made a mistake." His voice held the weight of a truth almost too heavy to speak, carrying regret and disbelief. Clara's hand froze, still holding the phone, her breath caught in her chest. Not dying? The world around her seemed to swirl, sounds fading as Dr. Grace's words lingered in her mind. For months, she had lived in the shadow of a diagnosis, a ticking clock always in her ear. She had said goodbye to her life, yet here it was, standing still, staring back at her. "Are you sure?" she whispered, her voice barely there, like the shatter of a fragile glass. "I am so sorry," Dr. Grace said, his tone pleading for forgiveness. She let the phone slip from her hand, her gaze unfocused, and everything she'd done. Abandoning her family, pulling away from her company, shutting down her dreams, felt like echoes of a nightmare. Across town, in the quiet walls of Mengo Hospital, the air was thick with a different pain. Alice lay curled up, her breath shallow as tears ran down her face. Her sister Emma sat beside her, the weight of her own guilt pressing down, suffocating. Hours ago, anger had driven her to words she could never take back, and now those words felt like chains binding them both. Dr. Grace entered, her face shadowed with sorrow. She approached Alice, each step burdened by the knowledge she carried. "Alice," she murmured, "I'm so sorry. There was a mistake." Alice's eyes met hers, filled with confusion and despair. Her voice cracked. "You told me I was healed. How could this happen?" The silence that followed swallowed everything. Emma turned away, pressing her lips tight, as if holding back her own pain could somehow ease her sister's. Dr. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "Less than 2 weeks." Alice's eyes closed, and the room sank into a heavy, numbing stillness. Meanwhile, Clara sat alone, her mind filled with the choices she'd made. She'd already stepped back from her life, her company, her legacy. But now, a fire ignited in her. Mr. Richard had been circling, waiting for her fall. Her pulse steadied. She would not hand him the victory he thought was his. The next morning, Clara moved through her office with a quiet determination, her eyes hard and focused. Her plan was simple. Let Mr. Richard believe he had one. She sent out a memo, formally stepping down. News of her departure spread quickly, and Mr. Richard wasted no time gathering support, holding whispered meetings, weaving a web of promises and power plays. But Clara was one step ahead. Behind closed doors, she met with the board, laying bare every betrayal, every document, every recording that painted Mr. Richards' ambitions in dark shades. The board listened, their faces turning from doubt to fury. By the time she left, Clara knew they were with her. Finally, the day arrived. Mr. Richards stood at the head of the boardroom, a triumphant smile barely hidden as he addressed the senior staff, his voice rich with self-importance. "It is with a heavy heart," he began, savoring each word, "that I accept the responsibility to lead this company. Thank you, Mr. Richard." Clara's voice sliced through the room, firm, sharp, and filled with a fire that had been smoldering for too long. Mr. Richard's smile faded, his face going pale as she stepped forward. "I'm afraid," she continued, her voice carrying a quiet power, "your leadership ends now." The silence was thick, and in that moment, Clara saw the fear in his eyes, the realization that his web of lies had finally unraveled. Clara's fingers tightened around the folder as she stepped forward, each movement deliberate, every glance unwavering. With a calm, steely voice, she placed the folder on the table. The board members leaned in, eyes narrowing, as she opened it to reveal documents, recordings, and undeniable proof of betrayal. Mr. Richard, once so smug and confident, suddenly looked small, his posture faltering, his face growing pale. Without breaking her gaze, Clara's voice pierced the silence. "I trusted you," she said, her tone edged with disappointment and resolve. "Everything I've worked for, my life's work, and you tried to take it all." Mr. Richard's mouth opened, but words failed him, his voice lost amidst the weight of his actions displayed so plainly on the table before him. The board members exchanged looks, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disdain as they absorbed the gravity of what he'd done. The chairman's voice rang out, final and unyielding. "You are dismissed from this company, effective immediately." The room filled with a silence so heavy it seemed to cling to the air. Security appeared at the door, and Mr. Richard, his shoulders slumped in defeat, followed them without a word. Clara watched, the faintest trace of satisfaction crossing her face, feeling the weight of the betrayal lift as he disappeared from view. Back in her office, just as she settled into her chair, her assistant knocked softly and ushered in a man Clara had only dreamed of meeting. Mr. William, the elusive investor she had sought for years. The very mention of his name evoked whispers of admiration and envy in the business world. But here he was, standing in her office at her most vulnerable moment, and Clara felt the mixture of surprise and resolve rise within her. Taking a steadying breath, Clara met his gaze, offering him a curious smile. "Mr. William," she began, masking her excitement, "what brings you to my company today?" He returned her smile, his tall, imposing figure casting a shadow across her desk. "Mrs. Clara, I've been following Flavor Holdings for quite some time." His voice was deep, deliberate, each word carrying an undeniable weight. "I wanted to see how you would handle adversity before making any decisions." Clara's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure as he continued. "In business, anyone can shine when things are going well, but true leaders reveal their worth in the face of challenges. I've watched how you responded to everything. Mr. Richards' betrayal, the strain of keeping your company afloat during turmoil. That's the kind of strength I want to support." Clara listened, her mind racing, yet her face remained composed. She was careful not to let her excitement show too soon. "I'm honored, Mr. William. What exactly do you have in mind?" He leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I want to invest in your company, a significant investment that won't just stabilize your operations, but allow you to expand into international markets." He paused, letting the weight of his offer sink in. "I believe your vision has the power to transcend borders, and I want to be part of that journey." Clara's heart soared, but she kept her tone measured. "That would be incredible, Mr. William. I've always dreamed of expanding internationally, but I never imagined someone of your standing would believe in that vision." Mr. William extended his hand, his face softened with a sincere smile. "You've more than earned it, Clara." As she shook his hand, Clara felt the full significance of the moment wash over her. This wasn't just a victory over betrayal. It was the beginning of something far greater than she had ever imagined. The air in Mengo Hospital felt thicker each day, filled with the constant hum of machines and the faint scent of antiseptics. It had become a second home to Emma. She didn't know exactly when it happened, but somewhere between her sister's first diagnosis and this inevitable end, the walls, the sterile floors, and even the soft sound of nurses moving quietly in and out of the room had begun to feel painfully familiar. And every time she entered Alice's room, a wave of dread wrapped around her heart, reminding her just how fragile their time together had become. Alice lay in bed, her skin pale against the crisp, white sheets. Once, she had been so full of life, always laughing, always pulling Emma into some new adventure, her spirit so bright that it was almost blinding. But now, her body was weak, her breathing shallow, each rise and fall of her chest a battle that left her more exhausted than before. The sparkle in her eyes had faded, replaced with a tiredness that spoke of a long, quiet surrender. And Emma, racked with guilt, couldn't help but feel that she had played a role in dimming that light. It hadn't always been like this between them. They'd been sisters and, more than that, best friends. Growing up, they'd done everything together, sharing secrets, dreams, and a bond that felt unbreakable. But somewhere along the way, life had begun to place stones between them. Small misunderstandings, moments of envy, times when anger flared over little things that never should have mattered. One argument had stood out above all others. Emma had lost her patience, frustrated over a situation she could barely remember now, and in a moment of anger, she had said something she could never take back. She hadn't meant it, not really, but words have a way of leaving wounds that no amount of regret can ever fully heal. Now, as she sat by Alice's side, watching her sister slip further away with every passing moment, that memory cut deeper than anything she had ever known. Each night, she would sit beside Alice, whispering apologies that felt both too small and too late. She would reach for Alice's hand, feeling the warmth that still lingered, as though holding on to her could somehow keep her here just a little longer. "I'm sorry," she whispered one night, her voice trembling, barely able to say the words. "I didn't mean what I said. I love you, Alice. I love you so much. If I could go back." Her voice broke, and she looked down, unable to meet her sister's gaze, afraid of what she might see there. Disappointment, anger, maybe even a sense of betrayal. But when she felt a gentle squeeze on her hand, she looked up to see Alice's soft, understanding smile. "I know, Emma," Alice whispered, her voice weak but steady. "I forgave you the moment you said it. Life's too short to hold on to anger." Emma's heart tightened, and tears blurred her vision. How could Alice forgive her so easily? It felt unfair, almost unreal, that someone could hold that much grace in their heart. She nodded, her words lost, letting her sister's quiet strength wash over her like a balm. From then on, Emma spent every waking moment by Alice's side, filling the hours with laughter when they could, tears when they couldn't, and stories of all the times they had shared. Some days were easier, filled with memories that brought a bittersweet smile to Alice's face. Other days, when the pain grew too strong for words, they would just sit in silence, holding hands, each squeeze of Alice's fingers a reminder of the bond that had always been there, even when anger and pride had tried to cloud it. On one of their final nights together, Emma brought an old photo album from home. They flipped through the pages slowly, taking in each snapshot of their lives, from birthdays to graduations, silly family trips to quiet moments in their backyard. Each picture felt like a small miracle, a moment frozen in time when everything had felt possible. They laughed at the ones where their hair and clothes reflected the trends of the past, and Alice, in her weakened state, even managed a few quiet chuckles, her face lighting up with the memories they had once shared. Emma reached the last page, her hands trembling as she turned the page. It was a photo of the two of them as little girls, sitting on a swing in their backyard, arms wrapped around each other, smiling as if nothing could ever come between them. Emma traced her finger over the photo, swallowing the lump that had formed in her throat. How had they drifted so far from that simple, pure bond? How had she allowed anger to break what was once unbreakable? Alice noticed the tears that slid down Emma's cheeks and reached out, resting her hand on her sister's. "We were lucky, Emma," she whispered. her voice faint but filled with a gentle warmth. Not everyone gets to grow up with someone they love so much. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Emma tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She leaned forward, wrapping her arms around Alice in a hug that felt both fragile and unbreakable. It was as if, in that moment, every argument, every moment of pride and anger melted away, leaving only love in its place. The following morning, the sun rose gently, casting a warm glow through the hospital window. The soft rays fell on Alice's face, making her look almost peaceful, as if she were simply sleeping. Emma reached for her sister's hand, her heart pounding with hope and dread, but she felt no response. Alice's fingers lay still, her breathing soft and silent. For a long time, Emma sat there, holding Alice's hand in the quiet room, the weight of her loss settling over her like a heavy fog. She felt a deep, aching emptiness that words could never fill. But as she looked at her sister's peaceful face, a small part of her found solace in the memory of Alice's forgiveness, a gift that she knew she would carry with her forever. Days turned into weeks, and the world moved on, but Emma's life had changed in a way that felt both painful and profound. She carried Alice's memory everywhere, her laughter, her kindness, her endless ability to forgive. Every choice Emma made from that day forward was guided by her sister's quiet strength, her reminder that life is too short for anger, too fragile for grudges. The years that followed brought many things: joy, sorrow, new friendships, and quiet nights filled with memories of Alice. But through it all, Emma clung to the lessons her sister had taught her in those final days. To choose love over anger, to hold forgiveness close, and to never let words be the last thing that separated the people she loved. In the end, Alice's memory became a guiding light, a reminder that, even in moments of anger or frustration, there is always room for kindness. Emma found herself sharing Alice's story with others, hoping that it might help them hold their own loved ones a little closer, choose their words a little more carefully, and forgive a little more easily. Alice's final gift to her sister wasn't just forgiveness. It was a legacy of love that Emma carried forward, a quiet, steady light that never faded. And though Emma would forever miss her sister, she found comfort in knowing that every moment she lived with compassion, kindness, and love. She was honoring the memory of the girl who had taught her what it truly meant to be a sister. If this story resonated with you, and you're looking for more uplifting and inspiring tales, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Together, let's explore stories that highlight the incredible strength of the human spirit and the blessings life brings. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I'm excited to share more stories with you in the next video. Remember, embrace the positivity around you and believe in the incredible beauty of life. Let's keep inspiring one another.